culture that you bragged about in every article, which you would do, which you would do 10 times out of 10. Which you would do 10 times out of 10 to get Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant. Then you traded at almost their request or approval all the picks you had to go get James Harden, and now you're left with Ben Simmons maybe looking around like, whoa, remember me, Ben Simmons? I haven't played in 14 months. Anyone left on the team? Who are you? Nice to meet you. It's an organizational catastrophe, the likes of which we've rarely have ever seen in the NBA. And so you have to say if, because you just don't know what the fallout's going to be.
I covered the Brooklyn Nets as a beat reporter for 2 years for ESPN. And I remember sitting in Madison Square Garden the moment that James Harden was traded to Brooklyn. And I remember seeing the list of players that were shipped out. We're talking about Jared Allen. We're talking about Karis LeVert, those culture builders that Zach was talking about. But it was like, this is going to be epic. This could be, and I think you termed it, Zach, one of the great experiments, the
greatest theoretical team in sports history.
The greatest theoretical team in sports history. And now you look at potentially one of the second or third greatest, depending on how you want to look at it, with Ben Simmons, Kyrie Irving, and Kevin Durant. We literally may never see any of those three have that come to fruition in a Brooklyn Nets uniform. And so to think about the last year that the Brooklyn Nets have had has just been absolutely wild. To think about the last 24 hours that the Brooklyn Nets had has been absolutely wild. I've been checking in with folks within the front office in Brooklyn, and the thought is it's hard to imagine that the entire saga that played out with Kyrie Irving, however you feel about it, isn't something that Kevin Durant weighed when going and, according to our Adrian Wojnarowski's reporting, specifically making this request to the owner, Joe Tsai. Not to the front office, but specifically to the ownership group.
It's impossible not to imagine all of this not unfolding if Kyrie Irving had gotten vaccinated. I mean, that's just the reality. Going back to James Harden, who decided in the middle of the season last year, I don't want to do this. Like, this guy's a part-time player. I don't trust his availability. And he essentially got his way out of Brooklyn. That was domino number 1. Here we are at domino number 17. I don't know. But, I mean, it's a lot to digest, and there's a lot to do now for the Nets and 25 teams who could theoretically trade for Kevin Durant.
Absolutely. Let's bring in the man who broke the news, our Adrian Wojnarowski, senior NBA insider. Hey, Woj. So we know that Kevin Durant has requested a trade from the Brooklyn Nets. What more can you tell us?
Yeah, Malika, Kevin Durant called the Nets owner, Joe Tsai, requested the trade today, and then Sean Marks, their GM, he started talking with Rich Kleiman, Kevin Durant's business manager, and there was a sense of inevitability, I think, around the Nets and around Kevin Durant that this day was coming. He had not been in contact with the team for weeks, and after Kyrie Irving opted into his contract last week, neither Kyrie Irving or Kevin Durant were in communication with the team, and there was certainly a lot of back-channeling going on around the NBA to suggest, that Kevin Durant was planning to ask for a trade at some point, and it happened today. And now I'm told that already, since the reporting here in the last hour, told that more than half the league has already called Brooklyn about the possibility of acquiring Kevin Durant, who at 34 years old and still at the very top of his game, and I think as importantly as that, with 4 years on his contract, perhaps there's never been a player, maybe since Kareem Abdul-Jabbar goes from Milwaukee to L.A., I can't think of a comparable player who is going to be traded like this. And I think certainly the Nets' plan is to really canvass this marketplace and see if there is something akin to a historic offer they can get back to him. You look at comparisons, Oklahoma City and Paul George, New Orleans, Anthony Davis to the Lakers, and you can make the case certainly. I think Kevin Durant was superior to those two players, again, under contract. And now I think very much everybody's in play in Brooklyn, certainly. And I think it's very likely that not only Kevin Durant, but Kyrie Irving have played their last games for the Nets.
Wow. And you said it. When you look at not only the caliber of player, but the time left, this is truly historic in terms of seeing where Kevin Durant could land. Woj, please do not go too far. We will be checking back in with you. Happy reporting. But I do want to get back to our panel here because the one, the only, Kendrick Perkins, who played with Kevin Durant. How fast did you have to run over here, by the way?
I don't run. I walk fast. I speed walk.
Well, I'm just going to get out of your way because Zach and I have been chatting for the last 5 minutes about I'm just going to say, sir, you have the floor.
You know what? I don't want to hear about what trade works. I don't want to hear about none of that. All I want to say is how proud I am of Kevin Durant. You know why? Since him and Kyrie arrived in Brooklyn, he has been the most reliable. He has been the most loyal when it comes down to being loyal and showing up to work to this organization. And I'm not blaming Kyrie Irving, although I feel like he has a role in this. You know, Kevin Durant has had Kyrie Irving back throughout this whole entire time. Kyrie Irving has been what? A guy that you don't know what he's thinking. You don't know what he's about to do. A guy that you could somewhat say you cannot trust. And I'm so happy that KD finally had the guts to go out there and make a decision for himself and say, you know what? I don't need this. I don't need to waste any more time of my precious prime that I'm in right now, the elite basketball that I have left. I could take my talent elsewhere to a culture that's about winning, a culture that's about being committed, a culture that I know what is about to happen and they're moving in the right direction. I tell you what, I'm just happy that KD finally did what KD wanted to do. And this is a completely different situation when he left Oklahoma City and went to Golden State.
Well, that was one of the interesting things that Adrian Wojnarowski, our senior NBA insider, just reported on our show, is that it was something where he hadn't been in contact with the organization for several weeks. And now he was looking at Kyrie Irving and that domino and then made this decision of where he thinks he needs to be in order to play his best basketball as he continues in his career there. Of all the things that we heard Woj just say, and there was so much good information in that, Zach, what stood out to you?
That we might have also seen Kyrie Irving having played his last game for Brooklyn. And I guess I got to get my fake Kyrie Irving trades out of the garbage can of history, although they never were truly in the garbage can.
No, recycling bins. Zach, we're in California.
But look, the market for him, he saw what the market for him was when he tried to go out and get a sign and trade, and the whole league, except for the Lakers, was like, yeah, no thanks. And now we're going to go back to that well.
Well, the opposite side of that spectrum is that Woj said about half the league in the 45 and change.
I'm surprised it's not more than half the league. The other ones are on hold.
Yeah, they're the ones that are trying to get through, like me trying to get to Perk saying, hey, we're coming on early, and I was on hold and trying to get through to his phone line. When you're looking at potential destinations, I know, Kendrick, you said that your first reaction was just pride in that he even asked for this trade. But when you're looking at those destinations, Woj has reported Phoenix is a possible place, Miami is a possible place. What do you see in the cards here?
You know what? Either one of those situations. But I would love for him to go to Phoenix. I think that makes the most sense, right? You look at the Phoenix Suns and the DeAndre Ayton situation. We know that that's pretty much a broken relationship. And I'm looking at it. You add Kevin Durant with Devin Booker and CP3, you could just fill in the blanks. You know what I mean? And James Jones, the thing that we don't realize when it comes down to James Jones is about winning now. James Jones come from up under Pat Riley, that Miami Heat coach, where he's not trying to wait a couple years. He's trying to go for it right now. So when I look at the Phoenix Suns, although the Miami Heat do look like eye candy, but I think for Kevin Durant, if he can land down there in the valley with those boys and a guy that he looks up to in Monty Williams, right? That relationship that Kevin Durant and Monty Williams have is a special relationship, just like CP3 and Monty Williams have. I like Kevin Durant to Phoenix.
That's a very good point. So we know that Phoenix and Miami are some places that our Woj has reported are on his trade destination list. But we're not the only ones who had a heck of a reaction to this news that Kevin Durant has requested a trade. You can see Ja Morant there saying easy money.
I just want to keep going up. You should have hated a little more, 'cause really it ain't good enough.
So Kevin Durant, he scored 29.9 points per game last season. If he is traded, That would be the 4th highest scoring average by a player to start the next season on a new team in NBA history. So we've already outlined why this is unprecedented, why this is historic. I want to bring in our NBA front office insider, one Mr. Bobby Marks, because we've talked about where Kevin Durant may want to go, and that's Phoenix and Miami, according to our Adrian Wojnarowski. Of course, the list doesn't stop there. We heard from our Woj that about half of the NBA, and the other half is probably getting their phones ready now, has already made calls. But what is actually realistic and possible here, Bobby?
Well, when you look at Durant, $44 million, he has a no-trade clause in his contract, so you have to get to close to $36 million in salary. As you said, it's fair game here. I think we have to start with the Toronto Raptors, Malika, here. When you look at players like certainly Scotty Barnes, the Rookie of the Year, Gary Trent, I mean, you could just go down. Pascal Siakam, Fred VanVleet, a combination of that. They have all their draft picks. I think we start with the Toronto Raptors. I think we certainly can go to, Zach talked about Phoenix as far as Mikal Bridges, possibly DeAndre Ayton in a sign and trade. A young player like Cam Johnson, they've got all their draft picks also. I mean, we could just go through all the teams here. Certainly a team like Memphis on here. We can find the Grizzlies. Memphis is a little bit challenging here, right? When you look at, we remove Ja Morant from the equation. Steven Adams, you know, certainly a player like Desmond Bane down here. They're going to be challenged just to get to the money here. But as you could see, we can go through all 29 teams, except I'm going to remove the Knicks here. I'm going to remove the New York Knicks because there's no way Brooklyn's trading Kevin Durant to the New York Knicks here. So we can go through all 28 teams and go through, put package together. But remember, Oklahoma City got 5 first-round picks, 2 pick swaps, and a young player in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. And what Brooklyn gets should top that.
Bobby, thank you. That's those are 4, those are some, but there are so many that we could see and so many more teams that are probably going to line up for Kevin Durant. I want to bring back Zach and Perk and bring in our senior writer, Brian Windhorst. And Brian, I'm going to start with you because we've heard from the first 2 gentlemen a little bit. What is your reaction to what Bobby just outlined for us?
I mean, I'm surprised at the timing because we didn't know what was happening excuse me, in this moment, but I'm not surprised at all that this is happening. From Monday afternoon, as soon as Kyrie Irving opted in, the league was preparing for this moment. They didn't know for sure that Kevin was going to go through with this because Kevin sometimes changes his mind about things, but they knew that it was possible and they were preparing for it. By Tuesday, there were star players having their teams ask them what their opinion of playing with Kevin Durant and or Kyrie Irving were, anticipating one or both would be on the trade market. Now, there's a couple of things you have to keep in mind as you look at Brooklyn approaching this trade. Number one, Brooklyn does not control their draft for the next 4 years. That is under control by the Houston Rockets because of the product of the James Harden trade. Therefore, it is unlikely they're going to look to completely rip their team apart and tank. And one of the more strange moments that no one's talking about here is that the Nets just made another trade. They traded for Royce O'Neal from the Utah Jazz. That's not a trade that you make if you're looking to tank. And tanking doesn't make any sense for them because they don't control their draft.
Right.
Number 2, let's go back and remember what Sean Marks said at the end of the season, which to me was the harbinger of all this to come. They wanted selfless, team-first, available players. So when you think about guys that they're going to trade for, you think about those types of players. I wouldn't look at stars. I mean, obviously, if they can get stars, that'd be great. But think about, don't forget that. Don't forget that is the focus. And so when you talk about constructing a trade with the Phoenix Suns, think about a guy like Mikal Bridges. My God, he qualifies for that almost exactly, which is one of the reasons why we think Phoenix could be a fit here. The guy barely misses a game, is completely team first and hardworking. So as you construct on the trade machine with your things, remember that the Nets want to have a team going forward that fits that vision that Joe Tsai and Sean Marks laid down. So those are 2 things. And then the third thing, and I think it's most important, is, and what my phone is blowing up is right now, is the executives wondering where Kyrie Irving is going to go.
Yeah.
Because I'm going to tell you something. If Kevin Durant is on the first train out, Kyrie Irving will be on the caboose as far as the Nets are concerned.
And you know what? You're talking about unselfish, right? Unselfishness. That's what Sean Marks talked about, and that's what he's talking about the culture needs to be. Well, hell, he sure need to address Ben Simmons. Ben Simmons is the main factor. And this is, look, we keep talking about Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. I want to see now, Ben Simmons, what are you going to do? You forced your way out of Philly last year. You basically quit on the team. You had rumors speculating around there that you wanted to be the guy. You wanted Philly to be your team. Well, guess what? You got your opportunity now. And again, I can't keep harping on how happy I am that Kevin Durant had the guts to say he wanted out, but no one should hold this against him, okay? No one. But I want to see what Ben Simmons go do. Are you going to be unselfish? Are you going to fit the culture?
Jack?
No offense, Burke. Ben Simmons is like number 7 on my list of items I want to talk
Number
about right
17.
now. Look, Brian said something interesting about the Nets draft picks being out of their control and that being sort of a disincentive for them to tank. I slightly disagree with that. The last time they were in this situation, now, again, we'll see who's running the team, but they showed an inclination to say, look, that trade's done. Yeah. It's a sunk cost. We can't care about the optics of giving the 3rd or the 4th pick to Boston. If we're going to be bad, we'll be bad on our own. We'll look for other picks and stuff like that. And the other point is, this trade is going to be so massive and so seismic that they can have their cake and eat it too. They can get talent and picks and swaps and everything. Bobby Marks just went through the whole board of teams. Some of those destinations are realistic, some less so, but they're going to be able to get everything in this trade. And the last time they were in this exact situation, it's hard to believe they're in this situation again that they were after the Boston trade with Paul Pierce and KG all those years ago. The last time they were there, this front office said, well, that's a sunk cost. That's over. We're not going to care about being bad.
Yes, Mr. Finger Up.
I got a question to you three, right? How are we looking at Sean Marks right now? We were talking about a guy that had Kevin Durant, a guy that still has Kyrie Irving, but possibly could lose him, had James Harden, lost James Harden, and you lose all 3 of these players, right? All 3 of these guys. We're talking about elite caliber players, top 15 caliber players in the league today.
Yep.
And you're on the verge of losing. You lost James already. You're on the verge of losing Kevin Durant, along with possibly losing Kyrie Irving. Don't Sean Marks deserve some of this blame on what's going on? Ain't he the one that's running the front office? Ain't he the one that's supposedly having people in position to make sure that this culture is set in stone? I'm just asking.
Zach?
The Nets capitulated to Kyrie and Kevin Durant the day they agreed to come. They capitulated, and this is what has happened. And if it's anything, it's a cautionary tale to the reason why that the league has developed this way over the course of time, that there's a separation between the front office, the coaching staff, and the players.
Yeah.
And I certainly agree that the players should have agency on where they go, but the players can't run the team. That's what happened here, and that was led to this disaster, and everybody has fault.
Well, and that was the sentiment that raised so many eyebrows, Zach, was Kyrie Irving saying toward the end of the season, essentially, that it's a collective front office, that these are collective decisions being made together, general manager Kyrie in essence.
Yeah, I guess he can trade himself now and handle that. But look, I mean, the couple of things. Number one, Perk mentioned top 15 players. You can't be a top 15 player if you don't play. Number two, Sean Marks, everybody deserves blame. Everybody. The whole league, the whole team, the whole franchise, top down, everybody deserves blame when something like this happens. I will say that if you had gone to Sean Marks and the Nets Brain Trust 3 summers ago and said you can get Kevin Durant without Kyrie Irving, I think that would have been their number one option. But that wasn't the deal. The deal was you got to get both, and like, this is what's happened. And I'll say one more thing before you're making faces at me. You're angry at me. I've heard from several front office people around the league for the last 8 or 9 days, curious about this very question. Who is going to be blamed for this? Is this something for which a GM or a president loses their job? Is this something that it's the players and they're just unpredictable? I think there is a broader curiosity about who should and does take the fall for this. But look, this was, as Brian said, this was the deal they made. That's on Sean Marks. That's on ownership. That's on the players. What has happened to their culture is on everybody because everybody is responsible for building the culture.
Well, Zach, last year, I recall at the beginning of the season, didn't you have the Brooklyn Nets pick to win it?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
I'm not backing down from that.
So here's the thing, right?
Who did you pick to win it?
It don't even matter. We're talking about the Brooklyn Nets. So with that being said, you had the Brooklyn Nets pick to win it all because of Kevin Durant, James Harden, and Kyrie Irving.
Yes.
You still had them picked as one of the top in the East, even when we found out about the mandate rule when it was dealing with Kyrie Irving.
True.
Zach.
top of the East?
Yeah, you still had them picked as one of the favorites.
I was one of the people on ESPN who picked the Celtics to beat them in the playoffs.
No. Before all
doesn't matter.
Before the James Harden left. So my thing is that let's not blow this out of proportion. Kyrie Irving still is a top 15 player in the game today. We cannot help it that the state of New York had a ridiculous rule in place that made no sense at all of why last season happened when it came down to Kyrie Irving not being available.
But when it comes to that, that's all good and well. But I think what stumps people, to kind of get back to Brian, what you were saying, when you talk about blame pie that we have handed out, when there were so many, as you said, unforeseen, almost uncontrollable in many ways, variables with a mandate that the state put down, with injuries to James Harden, with injuries to Kyrie Irving when we go back 2 years ago. And yes, also the bizarre saga of Kyrie sort of disappearing for 2 weeks and not playing when he was the one of the Nets' what would be their big three to be available, that then James Harden would. All of this stuff. There is so many things that are kind of swirling. It seems like somebody is going to have to be, quote unquote, responsible.
It's all of them. It's all of them.
Right.
Kevin Durant is responsible for the hiring of Steve Nash. Sean Marks is responsible for letting Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving run an organization. Kyrie Irving is to blame for his behavior and before the mandate rule. And then all of a sudden you have to blame KD to some form of fashion again for allowing Kyrie Irving to do what he did. And that means even losing James Harden.
I want to go back to something Perk said before about how a lot of people, including me, picked them to win the title. That's what makes this story so incredible. In the brief time that we saw Kyrie Irving, James Harden, and Kevin Durant play together, particularly in the playoffs, one playoff series, you looked around and were like, there's nothing we can do about this.
Yeah.
They were that good. They were that good. And either injuries happened, vaccination mandates happened, personality conflicts happened. Nobody cared enough to preserve that team in the end because that team was that good. That's what makes it so crazy.
This is the Zach I love.
Well, and this is the type of thing I keep having to remind myself. We are talking about the fact, that Kevin Durant has requested a trade. I cannot overstate how big this is. We have 4 more hours that we are going to be talking about it. And by the way, it hasn't even started. We're still an hour and 55 minutes away from the official opening, the official beginning. Welcome back to the NBA Today free agency special. Look, finally, Richard showed up. Legs is here.
1:30.
Well,
Just FYI.
No.
Kevin Durant requested a trade. Just FYI.
yeah, did you get that?
I don't know if anything happened,
Did you know that, Rich?
First of all, there's an anime conference right next door.
It's a lot. It's a lot.
And you were there.
Yeah, I
you were
was
the
there.
keynote speaker.
Yeah.
Got it. Understood. All right, let's bring in our senior NBA insider, Adrian Wojnarowski, who broke this news. Woj, can you share how all of this went down between Kevin Durant and the Nets?
Yeah, Malika, Kevin Durant has really been non-communicative with the Nets for several weeks. And, I think along the lines of the conversations they were having with Kyrie Irving about his future, listen, he wanted to help get Kyrie Irving a long-term deal in Brooklyn. That didn't happen. And when Kyrie Irving couldn't find a sign-and trade in the marketplace, opted in to his deal, communication, I think, between Kyrie Irving and the organization and the non-communication from Kevin Durant continued. And so the Nets were preparing for the possibility of this day that Durant would do exactly what he did today. He reached out to Joe Tsai, the owner of the Nets, told him that he wanted a trade, and then Sean Marks, the Nets GM, and Rich Kleiman, Kevin Durant's business manager, they talked about what a trade scenario might look like here. The Nets have been preparing really for weeks for the possibility of Kevin Durant on the market. These aren't the first conversations they're having internally about it. And they had, until the last hour or so, they had shut down teams who had called them. And teams were calling about Kevin Durant and trades. But now, and I'm told, at least half the league had called since the news was reported. And I think you can expect, there's certainly going to be more calls. And I think for teams around the league, they're just trying to get a sense of what the cost would be. And I think Brooklyn's trying to figure out, and they'll start to get a sense of what might be available to them. But I think they believe they've got a trade asset in Kevin Durant at 34 years old, who is under contract for 4 years, that may garner them as big or bigger of a trade package as we've seen in the modern era.
Yeah, unprecedented is the word that keeps coming to mind for me, Woj. What are you hearing about potential trade destinations for Durant?
Well, listen, there's no shortage of teams, and all different kind of teams. Teams who have young assets, teams who have draft picks and 25 and under stars, and then established all-star players in other places. The Nets are going to have to really discern between among a lot of different kinds of packages. And I don't think right now they're narrowing it down to say this is going to be a deal that's going to be, let's say, young players and picks. It's going to be, I think the idea is to get all-star players, to get all the available picks from teams. And certainly, listen, you can go through rosters and you can start looking at places, where they have, elite 25 and under players or star players in their prime. But I think for Brooklyn, they've got the leverage they do have is the contract status of Kevin Durant. Again, because he's under contract for 4 years, he has very little leverage about where he can go. Because if you trade him, he's going to have to play for that team. And he's going to have to play for them for a long period of time. And that's why teams are much more willing to unload, the maximum amount of assets versus, like, let's go back to Anthony Davis when he had 2 years left on his deal, and you knew you could give up everything you had, but you might lose him in free agency. That's why the Lakers were so confident. They knew they'd be able to re-sign him, and they gave up certainly a significant package for AD. But right now, if you trade for Kevin Durant, you got him, and he's at the top of his game at 34. And so that really opens up the world to Brooklyn, and it makes these trade talks really interesting.
Well, you've just been all over this reporting, and when you were on our show earlier, you mentioned that we very well may have seen not only Kevin Durant play his last game in a Brooklyn Nets uniform, but the natural question is, what does all of this mean for Kyrie Irving?
Well, the trade interest in Kyrie Irving for a sign-and trade will be different than what you'll see just trading him as an expiring contract, because in a sign-and-trade scenario, you had to be willing to give Kyrie Irving at least 3 years on a max extension. And when the Nets weren't interested in really doing that kind of a deal with the Lakers, but for Irving now as an expiring contract and a team that essentially might just take him on for the last year of his deal, teams who are talent starved, certainly the Lakers, a big part of the reason is they know they're not good enough right now. Kyrie Irving delivers a talent. Certainly that changes the trajectory for that team. But I do wonder, too, there are going to be teams who would look at a Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant package of trying to trade for both of them. I think right now the focus of teams in the league, there's not a great appetite for Irving. But that doesn't mean there's nobody who will take him on. I do think there are teams who will do it, but it's a fraction of what's available for Kevin Durant. And I think the Nets are going to be open to all of it. I'm told, listen, everyone on their roster is going to be available. They've got to look at every scenario right now to see how they come out of this window of time, what kind of assets they can get back. Would they go completely young, go all picks and young players, or can they bring back established star players for Kevin Durant that could keep them a contender? They don't have to decide that today. But certainly the calls are pouring into Brooklyn.
Yeah.
They don't have to make any. They're going to receive them all.
I know that Perk has a question for you. I want to bring him in just a second. But how are the Nets strategizing right now, fielding all of these calls?
Well, they've been preparing for this, Malika. This wasn't, while the timing of today may have been a surprise, I think there was a sense that it was coming. So they had been planning, and I think most front offices, you're always planning for any number of different possibilities. But when Kevin Durant just was not communicating with the organization, same with Kyrie Irving, I think there was a sense that at some point they were going to ask out. And in this case, Kevin Durant has asked out. And certainly it's hard to imagine a scenario where Kevin Durant would be traded and Kyrie Irving would remain in that Brooklyn organization. I think you can expect if Kevin Durant goes, they'll work really hard to find a way to move Kyrie Irving too.
Right.
Hey, Woj. So I want to know this. If The Brooklyn Nets, they try to trade Kyrie Irving, but they can't find a trade partner. They can't trade him. Could they negotiate a buyout and do it that way?
Absolutely, they could do a buyout with Irving. That's one I think that comes farther down the road. I mean, they've got a lot of avenues here to look for trades, package deals, package any number of players together in different deals. So that typically, as you know, Perk, is a last resort, doing a contract buyout. I do think there are going to be teams who have interest in Irving as an expiring contract. But certainly Kevin Durant and finding a deal for him is at the forefront for Brooklyn, because this is going to be, a franchise-defining trade, for the next decade plus. They've got to get a maximum return for him.
Well, Woj, I mean, look, I need to know, right? This is breaking news. I need to know. I got questions and I need answers. What is the likelihood of Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving being packaged up and traded together to a destination?
It's certainly a possibility. Again, two things have to happen, right? The team has to want both of them, and there's got to be a deal that makes sense. That's an immense amount of salary going out. I think they'll evaluate all of it. They have to. Certainly Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, I'm sure it's a scenario that's going to appeal to them. They've wanted to play together. They want to continue to play together. But the sense is they don't want to do it together in Brooklyn anymore.
Woj, thank you so much for that insight. We really appreciate it. Do not go too far, because there will be more news and your reporting unfolding throughout the day. Thank you so much for your time. I'm just going to turn it over to the host of this show, Kendrick. Bringing back here with Richard Jefferson, Tim Legler, Big Perk, and Zach Lowe. So we just heard a whole lot of information from Woj. I just want to start with you, Legs. What of all of that stood out to you?
Well, I think a couple things. First of all, it's almost incomprehensible to me to think that those two guys could end up together again. When you want out, you want out, right? Kevin Durant is not very appealing. The situation that's played out in Brooklyn. In fact, this has to go down as one of the most epic failures in the history of this league, does it not? I mean, that was a surefire championship on paper when those three guys came together. And that's what I'm saying. It was the most unguardable offensive trio in the history of this league at the top of any roster. And look what they have to show for it now as they break it up. So it's interesting to me to see what's going to happen. I'm almost just as interested to see what's going to happen with Kyrie Irving. Yeah. I mean, where is Kyrie Irving left in this in terms of his value around the league and what you'd be willing to give up to get a guy like Kyrie Irving now? After what's played out the last 2 years.
No, and again, I know this is, Kevin Durant and it's all of the things that we're talking about, but when you look at this situation, do you really think that, this is one of the most epic failures? And again, yes, right now it looks super intense. The Nets had a ton of talent and they built it up. They brought in two guys and they gave control to those two guys. And I don't want to say complete control, but they gave a certain amount of control, as a lot of star teams do. And people are like, this is what happens when you give it to the players. And you're like, I've seen franchises be ruined by teams, by management, by coaches. I've seen them ruined by everybody. So let's not just start saying here, you can't give players control. That's not true. You just have to make sure who you give control to, who you are taking advice from.
That's the big thing.
That's the big thing. Let's focus on.
Well, we can talk about a very specific who in this case.
Let's focus on the who,
because the who is very relevant.
But to your point, yes, was this team have a ton of talent? But when you look at the talent and you're saying, all the talent, but everyone on this panel knows talent ain't the only thing that wins championships. It's chemistry, it's basketball IQ, and it's availability. And these are things that the Nets were lacking. I don't think, obviously, we know they weren't lacking talent, but chemistry obviously wasn't there. All of the things that they needed to be in that pot wasn't there. And we can say, well, it was Kyrie, it was this. And I heard you talking about Sean Marks. Sean Marks built up a team, brought in stars. Stars did not behave the way they should, and now they're moving on. I think that the way I look at Sean Marks, he's doing everything right, because if the Nets do this right, they have two routes. One, they can farm and destroy any team and pull everything back. The second thing, they will be a playoff team, in my opinion, next season if they do this correctly.
With the departures of Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving.
Go get an all-star. Let's say hypothetically you can trade for Brandon Ingram. Let's say hypothetically you can get Brandon Ingram a pick and two young players, and then you can ship off Kyrie. If you have Brandon Ingram, who's a star, I'm throwing out. Sorry, Brandon, I'm just throwing out your name ideally. But if you put all of these guys together, don't forget they made the playoffs without KD and Kyrie, with young guys that were fighting and all pushing in the same direction.
But they had James Harden.
No.
Oh, you mean before? With Karis LeVert and Jared Allen
and D'Angelo Russell, and it's like they made the postseason before. So if you can, all that talent that you shipped away, if you bring in quality pieces, a young all-star, a top 10 pick, if you bring that all in with what you're asking for.
Yeah, but that's fine. There's a lot of ifs, but like Leg said, it still was a failure.
Yeah, 100% a failure.
No matter how you want to slice it.
But
no matter how you want to slice it or dice it, no matter. They had to pick a new coach. They got rid of Kenny Atkinson. I didn't think he deserved to lose his job.
No.
They brought in Steve Nash. Sean Marks had to okay that. As much as KD and Kyrie had power, he still had to approve that. He still had to sign Steve Nash. He had to still bring him back following
And
year
you know what he also did? Okay. He also re-signed Kevin Durant. And now they're about to get the whole farm for him back.
And he also lost James Harden. He's also about to lose Kevin Durant, who's arguably the best player in the game today. So I'm not saying, listen to me, I'm not saying that all the blame is on Sean Marks, but he should have some of the blame.
That's what I'm saying. You're going to get something about.
I just want to pause. I want to pause for 1 second. Let's just pause and take a breath. Kendrick Perkins just said, could the Nets buy out Kyrie Irving? And it wasn't a ridiculous question. That's the territory of insanity we are in right now.
That's some good work if you can get it. Let me go do nothing for my $39 million and negotiate down a little bit, and then go hit free agency and go where I want to go anyway.
Number two, Legs just said what I wanted to say, which is like, the whole NBA just watched what happened.
Yes.
Why would I give up my whole team to pair Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant? I just watched this movie. I know how it ended. I saw it.
If these two guys went to almost any, there's probably about, let's say, two-thirds of the franchises. If this would have gone on and you would have had a vaccine mandate, you would have had injuries, you would have had all of this stuff, the same scenario would have happened almost anywhere.
It wasn't a crazy question.
No, it wasn't.
But that's what makes it. But that's what makes it so wild.
The third thing I wanted to say is I'm glad we've said Jared Allen's name because that also throws into relief. Like, let's just remember why Kenny Atkinson got fired or lost his job or whatever terminology they use. A big part of it was he refused to start DeAndre Jordan over Jared Allen.
Over the guy that was an all-star the next year.
Over the guy who now we're looking at as the Cavs as being a real threat to be a riser.
Sit back and just like look at the rubble of this and just how ridiculous. I'm with you. Like, why? Am I supposed to call them and be like, hey guys, I know it failed in Brooklyn. Do you promise it's going to work? You promise?
One thing I want to say is I really want to say how I want to echo what Richard said. If the Nets handle this situation right, particularly with Kevin Durant and what they get, they're going to be a playoff team next year. They should be a playoff team next year. The concept of, let's just get a bunch of picks and some younger guys that haven't established themselves, I don't think that's what Steve Nash was brought in to coach.
Yeah.
That type of team. They're going to try to get back all-stars in their 20s, probably a couple of them, and picks. And then you can go and you can compete, not going to be a contender, but you can compete for a playoff spot in the Eastern Conference for sure.
Absolutely, and that's why when you're looking at Kyrie Irving, it would make sense to me if we hear later down the road that a team says, something like, well, they agreed to this many number of games played or something like that, some sort of back stoppages that they need to put in order to ensure a little bit of protection here. I do want to bring in our Eastern Conference reporter, Tim Bontemps, who has some news for us. Tim, what do you got?
Well, I just wanted to play, Malik, a little bit off of what Richard and Tim were just saying, in that when you look at the situation the Brooklyn Nets are in, they have traded away their next several drafts because of the trade for James Harden. That, by the way, was only 18 months ago. Feels right now like it might have been 18 years ago when you think about everything that's happened over that stretch of time. But because of that, the Nets aren't in a typical situation where, as those guys were talking about, maybe you tear this thing down to the studs and build this thing up from the ground up with picks and draft picks, like, say, or young players and draft picks, like, say, the Houston Rockets did when they traded James Harden to Brooklyn. So I think the Nets are in a bit of a unique situation here where they can go out and get a bunch of draft picks and get players that are ready to win now and turn around and have guys like Ben Simmons, Joe Harris, Seth Curry on this.
The Nets strategizing right now.
They fleeced New York. Got everybody. Denver made the postseason, right? Then you go and look at the Lakers when they got Anthony Davis. New Orleans took everything back. Where was New Orleans this year? In the postseason. So it doesn't like it for everybody that's like, the Nets have it. And it's like, no, they gave up a ton of assets and they're going to get a boatload of assets back. So, so that's what I'm saying is like, this is not unprecedented to have a high level player leave a team and then you get enough assets back to rebuild your franchise almost immediately. That's how good he is.
And listen, it's not hard to make the postseason now with the addition of the play-in tournament. The Pelicans made the postseason, and I believe they were 14 games below 500.
Yeah.
So that's not hard. But another thing that we also
say that
need,
to the other
but
half of the teams that didn't.
the other thing that we need to realize, Richard, is that the Eastern Conference is the best conference right now, okay? It's the tougher conference. So if you're going to get something back, you better make sure you're getting something back that's going to move the needle, because Boston is still there.
Oh, you're not talking about contending. You're talking about being a respectable place that you could possibly get free agents.
Rebuild your culture.
Thank you.
I understand that, but think about this for a second. Even some of the teams that didn't make the playoffs, they were like 4 games above 500 in the Eastern Conference.
That's
I'm just telling you.
But I think where the disappointment comes in, right, is the fact that we were talking about the Brooklyn Nets as not only just a contender, but potentially a favorite not that long ago. And so for a fan base, you know, the fan base that exists in Brooklyn that was thinking about what they could have or could see just making the playoffs, all of a sudden they're not the young, scrappy team that, oh, we're just happy to be there, like it was on that initial Brooklyn Nets team where everyone was just excited to see this team in the playoffs. Now there were expectations that come with it. And so to backpedal off of that a little bit, I think that's where it's like, yeah, making the postseason is nice.
No, but the reason why making the postseason is important, and is I'll go back to how the Nets got KD and Kyrie, how the
Yes.
Clippers were able to get Paul George and Kawhi. You had an attractive place with talent, and guys were like, if I go there, that can help. So just like the Clippers got I know they got the trade in Paul George, but they had young assets to go get it. So you reload with assets, and maybe the next time you trade for a high-level free agent, you clean it up a little bit. You make sure that the culture is first, and you bring everybody in. An example of that is Miami. Whoever they bring in, you're coming in here to be a part of a winning culture. You're not coming in here to dictate how you want it.
Absolutely. We still have so much more to come on NBA Today's free agency special, including